And also that again, it's really not so much about us as people like dying, it's more about what is happening around us that we want to eliminate. We want those things to die.
Hey, what's up? This is Corey Dion Lewis, clinical health coach and host of the Healthy Project podcast. Now, the research shows that social determinants can have a greater impact on your health more than healthcare or lifestyle choices. The purpose of this podcast is to discuss how to improve health and reduce health inequity by speaking to healthcare professionals, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs. Now, if you're enjoying the podcast, give it a review. Or you can also make a donation to the Healthy Project using the link in the description. It takes 30 seconds and it's super easy. Hey, thank you so much for listening. Now let's get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Healthy Project podcast. I am your host, Corey Dion Lewis. Great guest with me today. She's the founder of suicide prevention and suicide awareness and social justice education company, Estoy Aquí. I have Ysabel Garcia with me today to talk about this really important topic that I know, Ysabel, you're having a lot of conversations about, but I feel like it's not a lot of conversations within the community about. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Yes. So before we get into the topic at hand, can you tell the people a little bit about yourself and what gets you up in the morning?
Yes. So, as you said, my name is Ysabel Garcia. I use she, her pronouns. And my work is basically about spreading awareness about how social, cultural, and structural factors influence mental health and suicide, how they create conditions for mental health issues and suicide to happen, specifically within the Latina and Black community. And a part of that mission or goal is my lived experience within the mental health and psychiatric system. So I will say that's part of, or the main reason why I do this work is my story. So I am an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. I moved to the US 15 years ago. I didn't know English. I was a high school dropout. And the entire point of moving to the United States was, well, over there, you're going to get the education that you need to get to be successful, and you're going to get better treatment. You're going to get mental health treatment. And that didn't happen. The education piece happened, but the mental health treatment piece didn't go according to plan because
Right.
2 weeks after I moved to Springfield, Massachusetts, I was already hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital. And from there, a journey, I call it my psychiatric journey, started. And that's when I realized that people like me, suicidal people, are treated horrendously. There's a lot of discrimination and prejudice against us, and a lot of fear. So I have been in solitary confinement. I have been physically restrained. I have dealt with cops just because I said that I wanted to die as a teenager. So, yeah, that's part of my story and what gets me up in the morning, though, thinking about the injustices that I went through and how I don't want that to happen to anyone, but especially people like me,
Mm-hmm.
people with my identities.
Right. I used to appreciate that story so much because there are a lot of people that feel the way you feel or felt the way you have felt. And there's that fear of even telling someone because, like you said, of how they're going to be treated or how they're going to be spoken to. And unfortunately, sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
but it feels like when you express how you're feeling, hey, I am feeling suicidal, it's immediately lockdown. And that may not be what you need in the moment.
Hmm. Exactly. So there is one of the things that I learned throughout my journey in the system was that, oh, like a lot of therapists, social workers, providers in general are kind of trained to believe that coercion and violence are the appropriate measures to help someone who wants to die, which is ironic to me because how can that help somebody? But there is something called paternalism, where the so-called professional believes that they know better than the person they're helping. So they might assume, well, one, I know better. I have all this knowledge about psychology or whatever. And so I'm going to assume what you need. And what you need right now is to be contained because you are a danger to yourself. And that is not, for most part, I will say 99% all the time, that is not true. Actually, suicide is not even about physical death. And I know that sounds funny because it's like, well, isn't suicide about physical death,
Right.
intentional physical death? But again, 99% of the time, people are not really talking about physically dying. They're talking about situations, experiences, environment, spaces outside themselves that need to die, right? So that's what needs to die, not them, not us. It's just that most of us don't have the language to express that. And so what I needed at the time was curiosity. I needed providers and the in my family and the people around me to be curious and to say, actually, what do you mean when you say you want to die? Like what exactly
Mm,
is that? Because what I meant was that I was stressed out. I was overwhelmed. I was just
right.
there was too much pressure on me. Also, I was in a new country and that made it worse. I was already suicidal when I moved to the US. But the assimilation, the acculturation process, not knowing where I was, I didn't know anything about the United States. What my context was the Home Alone movie and like pop star magazines and
Well,
Hollywood.
if that
I
was your
didn't know what I
context,
was getting
I can
into.
I can see why it was such a shock. Oh my god.
I'm gonna be like even more lost and even more
Yeah.
frustrated. So what I needed at the time, honestly, was that curiosity. And based on my conversations with the community, most of what people need is that curiosity or that validation that things are hard, and also that again is really not so much about us as people like dying. It's more about what is happening around us that we want to eliminate. We want those things to die.
R
uh,
right. I don't want people to miss that, what you just talking about, because I feel, in my opinion, when someone says, "I wanna die," general population believes they want to kill themselves, and they're not even thinking about this person may be experiencing, you know, physical abuse, sexual abuse. So there could be something going on in their life. And like you said, you didn't have the language. They may not know how to deal with that. So the only way to deal with that is by death.
mhm,
And I
mhm.
feel like, man, it is such a hard conversation to have. And I understand that. Like, I understand how it can be a conversation, and that's why I have you on the podcast, because you know how to have that conversation. But I think it's just so important that we look outside of what's just in front of us, of the words "I want to kill myself," and like you say, be curious. Well, why? What's going on? And getting to the root of the problem.
Exactly. Exactly. I love how you said the root because
Hmm.
that's where it's at. And the work that I do with Estoy Aquí is connecting the dots between mental health, suicide, and social justice. And part of my work is talking about how social justice is a huge part of suicidality, especially among Black and Brown people.
Yeah.
And so, as we were saying, with the social justice approach, we don't look at the suicidal thoughts as the problem. It's more about the situations, the environments, and the spaces driving people to consider death as an answer. As an answer, as a response, as an option.
Right. Can we talk about that a little bit? So I know you focus a lot of your work on the Latina and the Black community.
Yes.
So why is suicide prevention important in communities of color?
So we know that suicide is actually a big issue in Black and Brown communities. Many people might not think so, but it is. And we know that suicide rates, especially now, they actually increase in 2021 after a 2 year decline. There was a decline in suicide rates, but then there was this increase in 2021, especially among people of color, Black and Brown people, and young people. So we know that, for instance, the suicide rates in indigenous communities are high. They're pretty high when in comparison to other racial and ethnic groups. But then we also look at the Latina and the Black population, and we see that those rates are also high. And for white people, the rate actually declined. So while the suicide rates rose in 2021 for Black and Brown people, for white people, it went lower, it declined. We also know that that suicide rates for people aged 10 to 24 increase a lot for Black people, African American, between the 2018 and 2021. Same for Latina people, indigenous people too. So now, those, I'm saying that as of now, but even before, years and years ago, there there has been a suicide has been a huge issue with. We see Latina teenagers that have a high rate of suicide attempts too.
Mm.
And so there's data also right out there that basically says that this is a huge problem. But in my work, I don't necessarily prioritize the so-called numbers because I'm more into the stories. But the stories also is basically the stories also confirm the numbers and vice versa.
Right.
So
Hmm.
when I think about my entire journey, these 15 years living in this country, and all the stories that I have heard, anecdotes, all the conversations I have had throughout training, my workshops, my healing circles, through panels, all this public speaking that I do, I see it. I see it. There are many, many people who are suicidal. And suicidal doesn't always mean in crisis. Because yesterday, what was it? Like a week ago, I was like, oh my God, like I don't feel good right now. Do I want to die? Or what is it that has to die for me to feel alive? I wasn't in crisis. I was just asking questions to myself about what needs to happen for me to thrive and keep going. So yeah.
Right. Right. What? No, I love that. I love that. Just asking questions. You know, when what are some of the unique challenges that you've seen through your experience with working with people within, Black
Yeah.
and brown communities? What are some of those challenges that you see that people face on a daily basis?
Yeah. I really appreciate that question because part of my work is focusing on the social cultural influences of Latina Black mental health and suicidality. And I believe that there's not enough conversation about social cultural factors. For example, colorism and anti Blackness is huge, huge in Black and brown communities in general, not just Black and Latina, but colorism, this preference for lighter skin tones, for instance,
Mm.
among our group, our racial and ethnic group. This obsession with European standards of beauty, the anti-blackness. This again, that's connected to anti-blackness, believing that the closer you are to blackness, the uglier you are, or the less competent you are, or the less smart you are. All these beliefs are part of the culture, and they, a lot of times, when especially youth, they might go to therapy and they might be told, well, you just have low self-esteem. Yeah. Or can we call that colorism? Can we call that anti-blackness? Can we call that the root, the actual problem, as you mentioned, the root of the problem? Is it low self-esteem or is it colorism? That was part of my journey too. All the issues, social cultural issues that I wanted dead, that's what the things that I wanted to die, never came up in therapy. Never, right? Another issue, which can be good and bad, this can be considered both a protective and risk factor, is familism. And familism is huge in Latina families, and it definitely affects their mental our mental health. And familism is about this obligation and loyalty to family, where there's a lot of collectivism, but collectivism to a point where it can be hurtful, because then, let's say, our needs, we might forget about them and just focus on the other person's need, especially the parents or the grandparents. So there's a lot of social emotional
Mm-hmm.
support for the people around you, your family. Can be also financial support. So there's a lot of emphasis on responsibility and what you can do for the family. A lot of it, like the whole focus is family. Family is
Right.
first. Of course, there's also assimilation and acculturation. That assimilation almost killed me. That was the thing that almost killed me. Not me, assimilation was the
Talk
thing that
about it.
almost killed me, which is
Mm-hmm.
when, as an immigrant, I came here to this country and I was like, well, how do I fit in? Because apparently my accent is too thick. Apparently, I don't look like anyone. apparently, apparently I cannot speak Spanish in public. Apparently, like, I
Mm.
guess, what do I do now?
Right. What can I do? Yeah.
What, right? So my thing was, well, let me be as close to whiteness as I can. So I stopped speaking Spanish. I would blow dry my hair so it would be straight. A bunch of different things. I almost changed my name from Isabel to Isabel with an I. So my name Isabel is with a Y. I almost changed it to Isabel with an I when I became a citizen. You can do that when you become a citizen. You can change your name legally.
Wow.
I almost did that, right? Because I wanted white people to pronounce my name, because
Right.
they always most of the time they messed it up, right? But that's
Right.
part of assimilation, fully adopting the dominating culture, the new
Right.
culture. Marianismo and machismo is definitely, oh my gosh, definitely an influence for the mental health of especially Latine, but like the diaspora, where you see gender roles are a very strong component of the culture, where you have the man is supposed to do this, is supposed to be the one in control, the one getting the money, very stereotypical. And women are supposed to be in the home and doing the cooking. Again, very stereotypical. But Marianismo is often not talked about, not as much as machismo, but they both come together. Marianismo are basically the standards for women. Like it comes from this
Okay.
concept of the Virgin Mary. That's why it's called Marianismo. Maria, Virgin Mary.
Oh, okay. Got it. That's
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yes.
And
And it's huge. Mhm.
it's huge. And you know what? That leads into that's a great lead into my next question. And that is the strong influence of cultural belief. And I know that in the black community, it's you're not ain't nothing wrong with you. You're just hungry. Ain't nothing wrong with you. You haven't prayed hard enough. There's all those things of it's not your mental health, it is something else. And we don't talk about mental health because of whatever reasons that were, past traumas of people in African American communities and cultures. But what does that look like? That cultural belief and attitudes that prevent people from seeking the help that they need, and what can people do? Like, how does that work within what you do?
Yeah. Part of what can become a barrier to talking about mental health openly is what I just talked about, familism, and definitely Marianismo and Machismo, and religion. I forgot to mention religion. But those three are the ones that I see the most. The elements that give that create those the most barriers for our people to talk about mental health, especially with parents, with older generations. So with familism, there's a lot of secrecy, a lot of do not bring shame to the family. You don't have to talk about
Yeah.
this with anybody else. So it's often a barrier for therapy, for especially youth who wanna explore therapy as an option. There might be a lot of resistance from parents. There might be. I don't like to generalize an entire
Right.
culture, but there might be a this thing about why are you talking about our problems to a stranger? Like we are family.
Mhm.
You should come to us. You should always come to us. But then when they right, but then maybe let's say the Jews come to the parents, and then there's not the validation that they're seeking.
Right.
So it's like okay, so with Marianismo and Machismo, so we know with Machismo, there's definitely a lot of pressure on men. There's a lot of pressure on men, and this idea that you cannot talk about your feelings, you cannot cry, even like just crying, the action of crying. With with women, there might be a little bit more opportunity to show emotions, quote unquote, but still there's still pretty much overall this idea that you shouldn't talk about that. Now, I will say one thing that I do offer as a reframe is that yes, we as a culture might have these barriers to talking about mental health, but I do believe we do talk about mental health a little bit, just in a different way. So many times we talk about mental health from the physical point of view. So someone might say, especially in Spanish, for Latinas who speak Spanish, ataque de nervios. Tengo un ataque de nervios, which means I'm having a nerve attack. Which, from the if you use the psychology, whatever language, it might be panic attack, but they're saying nerve attack. Okay, and so a lot of times that might be met with, oh, drink this tea, drink rosemary tea, because those are remedies. And that's what we have been used to. Okay, so your nervous system is acting up, you drink this tea, problem
Mm.
solved.
Right.
Obviously there's more,
Right.
to it. There's the root is not going to disappear with a tea. But what I'm trying to say is that there are definitely conversations about mental health. It's just not necessarily the way that it is promoted in social media, like with this very specific language, very specific, like depression, right? I mean, my mom might not talk about depression, but she might be like, wow, I have this huge headache and like I don't feel like getting up.
Right.
Like there has to be some quote unquote translation, not necessarily of languages, but of like our vocabulary when it comes to mental health, because it might not be the same, and I think that's fine. It's just how do we find a common ground? Like I call it depression. What do you call it? I call it anxiety. What do you call it? Okay, so maybe we're talking about the same thing, right?
Right.
So that's how
Right.
the way I see it.
Right. We can still have the conversation, but I have to meet you where you're at and speak your language so we can, because I feel like for a lot of people, when you're talking about, hey, my nerves are bad, or have this tea, that's very surface. It's like it's a very surface thing. It's still, but it's a step in the right direction. Like, okay, we're doing something.
Right.
So, but how do you make
Right.
that next step to continue that conversation to where it doesn't feel like, oh no, I don't want to talk about this. Nope, nope, nope. We're not doing that. You know what I mean? How can we make that next step and having a different conversation within the conversation?
Right. Right. And yeah, and I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, is because it's really about, I call this holding multiple truths. That's how I call it. Because you have your truth, I have my truth. Can we meet in the middle? Is there a
Mm,
common understanding of something? I don't believe in this idea of changing people's minds. I, that's too much pressure. That's a lot. That's a lot.
right.
To change someone's upbringing, like their entire
Oh my gosh.
socialization. I'm not gonna change my mom's socialization. My mom is
Yeah.
almost 70.
We ain't got time for that.
Like, listen, what we can do is to clarify what is it that we're talking about here. I really think it's about clarification. So this is what I do, especially if when you're having a conversation about mental health and someone is like, yeah, but that doesn't exist or whatever, or maybe you're being dramatic, or you have a house and a bed, I don't know why you're complaining, blah blah blah.
Mm, mhm.
So usually when people talk about mental health, whatever it is, they're providing a solution. We might not agree with that solution, but they're providing a solution. My mom, when my mom says, here's the tea, she's providing a solution. For me, that is not a solution,
Right.
right? That's not a solution to me. This whole idea of, well, you already have a bed and a house, well, that's not enough for me. Maybe that's enough for you. Okay, so let's talk about exactly what is the problem solution that the person is offering. So we have to grab that from the conversation. What exactly are we talking about here? Then the other thing we have to do is, okay, what information is missing from this person's perspective, and how do we add the information?
Mhm.
So it's not about you are wrong, I have to change your mind. It's about there is information missing here, and I want to add to your worldview. I want to add information that you might not have. And so that's how I introduce it. So when my mom says, well, let's say someone says depression doesn't exist, I'm like, well, I wanna I wanna add something to that. Can I do that? And I ask for consent. See it differently. I wanna add to that. I wanna add to it.
Right.
So again, not about fighting or anything. I just wanna
Yeah.
add information that I have. Like
It
that's
seems
it.
so non-confrontational, and you can have a very fruitful conversation about this topic.
And so another piece of this is, so for me, when I think about depression, I think about right not sleeping a lot, nor not feeling like taking a shower, feeling this and that. How would you call that? I'm wondering, how would you call it? It's about curiosity, it's about translation. It's right, like, so
Yeah.
it's also how we get into the combo, like our mindset getting into the combo. Because if we're going in, you're wrong and I'm right, then
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
probably
it shuts it down. It
it.
shuts it down.
I mean, yeah, like, and I see that a lot with youth and the older generation, with Gen Z,
Mm,
millennials, and then how do we call it, baby boomers or whatever. Like, I see that intergenerational
mm,
tension. And so part of my work is also
right.
talking about this, how to embrace that tension in these conversations. But basically, once you figure out what is the solution or problem that this person is putting in this space, and then what information you want to add, then you go to the last step, which is basically looking at both things. So, like, for instance, how can we honor the fact that you think what I call depression doesn't exist, and me believing that it does? Like, how can then we work together then?
Right.
Right? Like, how can we coexist knowing that you have this truth and I have this truth? So again, it's more about opening the door. It's not about becoming a wall. We want to become mirrors, not no walls. We want to learn
Mm,
to
I like
reflect
that.
each other,
I like
reflect each
that.
other. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So for those people that aren't shy about talking about how they feel, right? And but how is there a right or wrong way with having a conversation about suicidal thoughts, or talking to someone who may be expressing that they're having suicidal thoughts? Is there a right or wrong way?
Yeah, so I will say I wouldn't. You know what's interesting? I love this question too, because I wouldn't say that there is a right way. I definitely think there are things that are being taught in some trainings that are like, no, like, I
Mm.
wouldn't have that, or because I don't find them culturally relevant or whatever. But I also wouldn't say that the approach I use, which is peer support, that's the approach that I use to talk about suicide. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but I like it. It has worked for me. It has worked for the people I support. And so, having said that, they are things that we can definitely say that can interrupt the suicide. And one thing that I want to say before I go into what that is or how that looks like is, you don't have to be a therapist to help interrupt the suicide. You don't have to. You don't have to be a so-called quote unquote professional. Most most of professionals don't even know how to talk about suicide in the first place, because, believe it or not, suicide prevention, or whatever we want to call it, is not in a lot of college curriculums
Mm,
for mental health counselors and social workers, and just overall it's actually not a popular subject in college curriculums. It's very rare to see suicide in a college curriculum. It exists. There are colleges who do have it, but
mhm.
it's very rare. Okay. So if you think that, well, a professional is better equipped, no, no, not really. They might
Mm,
take
right.
trainings in their workplace, but those trainings are also often, again, not culturally relevant, or they promote some form of coercion, control, or what I call white supremacy culture, which is another, oh God, that's another entire different topic or monster.
That's part 2.
Yes. So, okay. So, having said all of this, there are ways, one, that you can ask the question, this very this taboo question of, are you suicidal? Because many people are not ready to hear the answer. If it's yes, they're not ready, but they want to ask it anyway. So I will say, if you ask a question like that, you have to do some internal work first. You might want to take a few deep breaths. You might want to remind yourself that this 99% of the time is not about the person, it's about something else outside of themselves that is happening to them, that is causing this feeling of despair and pain. I do not ask people, are you suicidal? I don't like that question because suicidal means many things. So I'm not really asking, I don't think I'm asking a direct question. So what I ask is, how does being alive feel like right now? How does being alive feel like right now?
How does being alive feel like right now?
That's it.
And
I
that can
don't ask,
go in many different directions.
right. And that is the point. The point is
Right.
that they actually are like, wait a second, alive? Let me think about
Yeah.
that. Because are you suicidal is yes or no, basically. That's one. Two, I honestly, how does that open up the conversation? Because usually when you ask someone, are you suicidal? And they say yes, the next question is, do you have a plan? And that is not really where the conversation, in my opinion, needs to go. I don't think it has to, it can go there, but we can ask a different question for that. Many times where people talk about suicide, it becomes an interrogation because we
Right.
are seen as criminals, like we're committing some form of crime. And we suddenly a lot of providers and people, family, friends, get into this interrogation type of mindset where it's like, are you suicidal? Yes. Do you have a plan? Yes or no? Like, wait,
Right.
having a plan, all of that stuff is very complex. So one question that I ask or statement is, I would like to hear the story of how you came to see suicide as an option. I wanna hear that story. I wanna hear that journey.
You know
Or
why I feel like that's so powerful, Isabel, is that may be the first time someone, when they're feeling that way, that they're allowed to even tell their story.
exact.
Like, they're like, man, no one's probably listened to them because their parents or their families tell them they ain't nothing wrong with them, or they don't know who they can go to. They have all, man, that is such a powerful
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, it might be that this person have they have thought about dying before. So how long has been thinking about suicide a response for you? Another favorite question of mine is, which I have talked about already, is what situations happening outside yourself give power to your suicidal thoughts, because there's also a power dynamic going on, an existential power dynamic where it's like there are things, situations, environments, spaces that either make our suicidal thoughts empower or powerless. So what can empower, what is empowering those suicidal thoughts, or what can make them powerless? Because there's this idea, we have to take your suicidal thoughts away under any, oh come on, like, are you really gonna dismantle colorism?
Right.
The entire, are you gonna dismantle racism right now? Because those are often, again, those social cultural structural factors are often the root causes of suicidality and mental health in Black and brown communities. So are you gonna dismantle all of that? I don't, listen, I'm realistic. I'm like, what can make them a little bit powerless? Like,
Mm.
what is out there? Can we think about that? Another question that I like to ask, but this is more for providers, to be honest, this question is, when you think about suicide, what do you see or what do you imagine? Instead of asking people, do you have a plan? Are you gonna do it? When are you gonna do it? When you think about suicide, what do you think about? What do you imagine? Just just curious. When I think about suicide, I think about my funeral. I see myself in the casket. I see the people in the funeral. But guess what? Thinking about my funeral is actually a protective factor against suicide for me, because after I see myself in the casket, right, which is very, can be very scary, I also think about people reading their eulogies about me and saying how awesome I was and
Mm.
how funny I was and how intelligent I was. And that reminds me, wow, I actually do have people that care about me. I forgot. So this is why we cannot make assumptions also about the so-called plans or whatever, because for all you know, it can have a protective element to it. So yes, thinking about my funeral and my actual suicide actually does help me prevent suicide. Isn't that interesting?
It's super interesting, but it makes sense though. Like to me, it makes sense as you're thinking about that and you're thinking about I know this person is going to tell that story about me, or whatever the case may be. It can be like, oh wow, there are people that actually care about me and care about my well being, and
Oh,
I don't want to die.
yeah, so there can be a twist to all of these so-called suicidal thoughts, but we have to be creative and we have to be open about it. So if someone were to say, "Yeah, I think about my funeral, I see myself in the casket," a provider, family, or friend can be like, "How about the eulogies? I wonder what they say." Have you thought about the eulogies? Often, sometimes people talk, they say very nice things. I wonder if you have thought about that part,
Mm.
right? We can be creative about these things. Another thing is suicide notes. So I have a suicide note on my nightstand. A lot of people will look at that and be like, holy crap, we need to hospitalize you. Little do they know, it also prevents my suicide, because when I look at my suicide note on the nightstand, it gives me control, because I'm like, you know what, I can be out at any moment. And sometimes that's my only source of power and control over my life. So when I don't feel in control in areas of my life where I'm like, there's nothing I can do, I look at a suicide note and I remind myself, actually, power. I can leave at any
Mm.
time. Guess what? It prevents my suicide, because it gives me this idea of having an option. So many people don't want to go there because it's scary. I get it. I get it. It's scary knowing that Isabel thinks it's an option. But just the fact that I think is an option gives me that control I need to keep going. So again, but how do we know that? We know that because of conversation, because we are opening this dialogue and this door to having these scary conversations. Another question that I really like is how. Oh, so once you ask, when you think about suicide, what do you see or what do you imagine? It might be that this person says, right, like I already mentioned the funeral.
Right.
It might be that the person says, well, I see this, I see X, using X, Y, and Z to die. I see myself using a method. Imagine whatever method you can, think of.
Right.
So how does that image or dream or nightmare, however you're calling it, distance you from wanting to stay alive? And so also looking at this as distancing, like as a movement, that helps me a lot. Again, it's not this binary of, do you want to die or not? It's
Right.
like,
Right.
okay, so let's look at this as if we have a line right here, how does thinking about X, Y, and Z distances you from wanting to stay alive? Where would you be? Woo, this is so also playing with those kind of metaphors. Also, it can be, how do these images about suicide move you closer to wanting to stay alive, right? In my case, the funeral is like, yeah, the eulogies actually are helpful to think about. I could keep going forever. Listen, I have, this is what I train about. I have a 7 hour and a half training just about this stuff. I could speak
Wow.
about this forever. But yes, these are a couple of things that you can ask. One. I guess the last thing I will say, a very powerful question is, what problems will suicide solve for you? Because
Mm-hmm.
many times I forget that there are other options, that there are other form of responses that I can try. Like, I just forget. I get very like tunnel vision about, no, 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 this is the only way. I forget, oh, wait a minute. Also, if these are the problems that I want to make disappear,
Right.
would I still want to die if those problems could be solved? And 100% of the time is no. Like, I don't really want to physically die. It's really, I want racism to disappear, obviously. I want oppression to disappear, obviously. And obviously there's no like, oh my god, we're gonna solve oppression, but like at once. But like, what are small things that we can do together, or steps to take, that can give us some hope, something to look forward to, at least. I'm gonna shut up now.
No, so good. That's Isabel, that's so good. And those are some of the things that I wanted the audience to know, because regardless of if we shove it under the rug or we pretend it's not there, these things are happening around us constantly. And there are people in our lives, whether it be a family member or a friend, a coworker, that may be experiencing some of these things. And if we don't have some of the words and the knowledge that you're bringing to the table in our tool belt, we can't help those people that we love. So no, I appreciate everything that you just said, and such a valuable insight and conversation. Isabel, again, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciated it. For anybody that wants to learn more about you, about what you do with at Estoy Aquí, where
Mhm.
can they find you and where can they reach you?
Yes. If you want to know more about my training, workshops, healing circles, my services, you can go to estoy-aquí.org. There you will find all the information. And if you want to follow me on social media, then you can just go to Estoy Aquí LLC. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok. Just write Estoy Aquí LLC. It should show up. I'm trying to do more educational stuff through social media as an extension of my workshops, trainings, and circles. So yeah, I recommend following me there too.
Yes, and I'll make
Yeah,
sure I have all those links in the description of this episode, so make it easy for people to get there as well.
perfect. Yes, I will
Yes.
appreciate that. Mhm.
Isabel, thank you so much for the time. It was well worth the wait and and the back and forth. I didn't think it was going to happen, but it happened.
I know. I
Thank
know.
you so much again. And everybody, thank you for listening to the Healthy Project podcast. I'll holler at you next time.